Hello, everybody. I believe that we are now officially live. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be talking about what's new in Kendo UI for R1 2021. We have a jam-packed schedule today, so we're covering absolutely everything from Angular, React, jQuery, and Vue. So we know there's a ton of content to cover. And I'm joined today by Alyssa Nykel, TJ Ventol, and myself, Carl Bergenham, and we will jump through and cover all the products for you. So say hi to the folks out there, TJ and Alyssa.
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
All right.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I know. I'm pumped. I'm pumped. If I ever seem like I got some of the jitters, it's purely excitement over what we have going on today. But let me go ahead and just do some housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, everything that we're covering today is going to be available and already is available on the What's New page for Kendo UI, which we actually recently revamped. So when you go to the What's New in Kendo UI, you'll be able to see this view that allows you to pick Angular, React, Vue, or jQuery and dive into specifically what's new. And you can get some nice screenshots. You can dive into some of the specific features from there with, of course, links to demos and everything like that. Now, I also want to mention, and shout out to a couple of us from this webinar, they're in the featured video here. Everything that we are talking about today in this whole session will be recorded and later posted on YouTube. So for anybody interested in following up, or maybe you can't catch absolutely everything, we will record the webinar and everything will be up and posted on YouTube. So you can keep a lookout for that as well. And you can find that specifically under this link. So either you can search for Kendo UI when you go to YouTube, or if you want to bookmark this, it's under Kendo UI TV. So just remember to have that TV at the end and you'll be good to go. Also, throughout this entire session, we have a couple different ways you can ask us questions. One is using the Twitter hashtag #HeyKendoUI. So we have folks monitoring Twitter, and of course, also we'll follow up with anything that we see on Twitter after this webinar. You also have the little chat box on the right-hand side. So if you look in the GoToWebinar interface, you'll be able to see a little chat box. That is specifically for questions. So outside of the folks that you see on the webcam today, we also have a large crew of people behind the scenes helping and answering questions as we go through here. So if any and all questions pop up, feel free to either type that away there or hit us up on Twitter and we'll be able to help you and address the questions. And if we have time, we'll even be able to do some questions here live with everybody on the line. And another thing to keep in mind is that tomorrow, actually, starting at 8 a.m. all the way to 4 p.m. EST, we are going to be very busy on Twitch. So if you're not familiar, we have Code It Live, which is kind of our Twitch organization where we do a ton of stuff during the week. But tomorrow specifically, we'll cover everything that's new in the DevCraft bundle. So everything under Telerik and under the Kendo UI brands all day. So essentially what we're covering today, plus a lot more, just diving a little bit deeper, even with some of the engineering folks and a ton of interactivity happening throughout the day. And you can see the schedule for that. It's not just going to be Kendo UI or Angular all day. Poor Alyssa, I think that would be quite a lot of content for you to cover. So you'll be able to see our faces. And if you joined the earlier webinars this week, you'll be able to catch all of the stuff on the .NET side as well as a part of this. So I'll probably remind you again towards the end, but just keep in mind that tomorrow, jam-packed day to cover even more than we're covering today. Now, before we dive into everything specifically, I just want to just kind of show everybody this look of what is new in R1 2021 across all the different flavors, in case you can't join us for absolutely everything. But what you see is that we have a jam-packed release. I like using that word quite a lot, but you can see here that factually this is true, right? We see a ton of new components across Angular, React, jQuery, and Vue. We see a lot of updates as well, including, for example, support for latest and greatest frameworks with support for React 17 and Angular 11. And of course, for those of you interested in Vue, the last release had Vue 3.0, but I just wanted to throw that in there in case anybody's looking for that. But yeah, if you are looking for any and all new things, this is kind of a quick little snapshot, and this is what we'll dive into today. So I won't spend too much time here just going through this because I'll spoil all the fun once we start diving into the individual features. Now, just to give you a rough schedule, I know I've taken some time, but this is kind of where we're going to be going today. So we'll start up with Angular, then we'll jump into React, and then jQuery, and then we'll wrap up things with Vue, and then of course we'll try to pause for some Q&A along the way if we can. But this is roughly the schedule, so in case you need to pop in or out, you'll be able to know which section that might interest you the most. Or of course, if you're a true fan, you'll be able to stick here throughout the entire 2 hours that we have going on today.
But if you don't, we still love you.
Exactly, we do. And with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand things over to Alyssa, who will start covering what's new in Kendo UI for Angular.
Thank you so much, Carl. All right, so I'm going to start this, change myself to the presenter. And let's see, I think you should be able to see the slides, possibly.
Looks good. Yep.
Awesome. Yep. Wonderful. Well, yes. So my name, as mentioned before, is Alyssa Nichol, and I'll be going over the Kendo UI for Angular updates for R1 2021. And you can find me at Alyssa Nichol on Twitter, and then of course our Twitter handle at Kendo UI for anything updates for Kendo UI specifically, but then also just Angular and what's going on in that community. And of course, the Hey Kendo UI hashtag that Carl mentioned. So if you have questions and you're not comfortable with the GoToWebinar interface for those questions, any of these methods, adding or the hashtag, will reach us and we'll make sure to get back to you. So before I dive into our amazing components and features, I wanted to give some Angular updates. So if you're interested in podcasts, I am a part of 2 weekly Angular Air every week on YouTube, and then I'm starting up a new one called Devs and Dragons that's every other week and streams to YouTube and Twitch. So we'll be playing board games, getting to know some influencers in the community, and having lots of fun. So check those out. And as mentioned, our Code It Live channel is so hot and so awesome. I am a part of 2 shows this quarter, JavaScript Girl and a .NET World on Tuesdays and UI Fridays. So check those out, and we cannot wait to see you and talk to you tomorrow during our stream that will be diving more into some of these components and features that we'll be talking about today. So yes, check it out. Hope to see you in chat. So this is the article of all articles. If you're following along today, this is the link you should pull up. Or if you're catching up and watching the stream later, this is what you need, because not only did Carl do a beautiful job synopsing what each of the new components and features are, but also there are links directly to those features or those new components in the docs that you can open right away. So I would highly recommend pulling this up and kind of following along, and that way you have access to the demos at your fingertips while we go along. But yes, Kendo UI for Angular highlights. And actually, before we dive in, I wanted to start one of our polls, if we could. I don't know exactly how to start that, but I know here it is. So which is most true? I have to like zoom in because it's like super small. Select one of the following. I only maintain existing Angular apps. I plan to create new Angular apps, or I do not plan to use Angular. So if you could answer the poll, I'm super curious. I think we've got about 340 people with us right now. The number keeps going up as more people join, but I really want to know how many of you are planning to, currently using and maintaining, or maybe not here for Angular at all and you just arrived early. Yes.
A lot of people with new apps.
Oh, yeah,
quite a few actually. That's interesting.
I'm going to pull up the answer. Oh, yeah. For about 48% right now, I plan to create new Angular apps. Nice. So, yeah.
I've got my Angular water bottle. I don't know if people can see my camera now, but got my Angular water bottle here. So.
So you're not partial is what you're saying? You love all frameworks.
Exactly.
You do love swag from everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take anybody's swag.
Nice. And about 20% are maintaining existing Angular apps. So very cool. And 34% are not planning to use Angular, but welcome anyways. We love to have you, and we'll shortly be off to the other flavors. So that was, I'm going to go back over here, pop over to new components. So I've got two main slides that are like this. One is going to bullet point our new components, and the other one is going to bullet the components that got added features. So first we're going to move through all the new components, and I have a couple of demos that we will hopefully seamlessly and not painfully jump out of the slides over to and check out. But again, tomorrow on the Code It Live channel on Twitch, we'll be doing an even deeper dive for some of these things. So check it out. The drop-down tree, multi-column box, the tile layout, floating action button, expansion panel, and last but not least, text area. So we have these beautiful 6 components that we're going to go into. And kick it off with the drop-down tree. So the new Angular drop-down tree component provides the simplicity of a drop-down. It's really quite beautiful. I'm going to pull up the pictures so you can see it. There you go. Okay. The simplicity of a drop-down with the hierarchical list of items of a tree view. So this element hides the Angular tree view inside of a dropdown, and it still allows the user to have this tree view list, but it also saves valuable space in your interface by collapsing it into a dropdown. And they can also, of course, as you see on the right-hand side, select items and it populates that dropdown. And so I think it's really, really cool. The select element got a few upgrades from us this year, or I guess this release. The next one is the multi-column combo box. It's quite the...
Yeah, try saying that 10 times fast. Very descriptive name, but try saying it 10 times fast.
No, I love it. Like seriously, for when you're looking things up and you're trying to find, it's beautiful. But like when you're like trying to talk about the item itself, we're just gonna call him MCCB. No, I'm kidding.
Yep.
Okay. So
I do that.
But here is the link to the multi-column combo box in our docs. And again, as I mentioned, it's a richer version of the select HTML element, and it lets you choose from a table structured list of options. So here is a screenshot of that gorgeousness going on. And if we go, yes, there, it also has these features of data binding, of course, naturally, filtering, templates, and entering custom values. So I was actually talking about this with a friend, and we are using on a project with Kendo UI, we're using the normal dropdown, and he was like, oh, it'd be really cool to use that new multi-column combo box here instead because of the amount of data and the type of data we have to show, to choose from. And he was like, but we need the search. Like we need to be able to filter through them. So we'll have to stick with this one for now. And I was like, hold up, in true Kendo UI fashion, of course, we have the search. So on every modified input, the filter change event is triggered, and that contains an argument, a string value that you can use to filter the source. So that was beautiful. It comes out of the box with it. I love that it shipped with that feature because I was scared. I was like, oh, I gotta go check the docs. It does have filtering and it's ready to go for you right now. So I think my GIF should be playing maybe. Okay, yeah, it was. So yes, that is the multi-column combo box. Check it out. And I think tomorrow we'll be diving more into that one as well and talking about some of its features. So Telerik.com/KendoUI. Kendo Angular UI /component/layout tile layout. This is one you're going to want to pull up. You're going to type it in, tippity type. Or if you pulled up the blog post at the beginning, there's a link under the tile layout section. But this one you must see and play with to believe because it's so beautiful and so fun. But yes, the tile layout component, I was so jealous. Remind me, Carl, who was it that got it last release? And was it React? jQuery?
jQuery, yeah.
I was
not to spoil the fun, but TJ has a little story for you on when his section comes up.
Oh, I'm excited. I was so literally after our last release webinar, we got off, the stream ended and I was like, why don't I get one of those? And Carl was like, patience. And so we do have it this release. It is a component that displays and aligns a collection of tiles into columns and rows. And the tiles are customizable in terms of their content, of course, the size, positioning, and the space between the tiles. So it's a way to allow end users to rearrange and resize the tiles that are going to show up, and it gives the developers full control of the flow of the component during these events. And it's really, really beautiful. I have lots of fun with these tiles in my demo for tomorrow. I won't spoil too much, but definitely show up, check it out, and if you can, look at the demo page for this because it is amazing. I loved playing around with it, and I was so excited that we finally got this one. But yes, I think we're ready for our floating action button. I think she takes the cake. I think so. For me, for this release, I always pick a favorite. And I know it's silly because you're like, it's a button. How glorious could it be, Alyssa? No, it's beautiful. So yes, button/floating action button is how to navigate to it in our docs. And this is used to specify the primary or most common action in an application, sometimes called the call to action. So here is a bit of markup using it, and here is a little card, if you will, that has a floating action button on it. Looks super simple, super mundane. You know, you've got a button and it's floating there. The features, they're beautiful. So I actually do have a demo. This is gonna be our first test to see how hard changing screens is going to be for us. But before I get into it, I'm just gonna highlight some of the features that I wanna talk about. So the floating action button not only allows you to like move it around and modify like where it is on the page, because that's pretty simple, right? You're just floating a button. But it has this cool list of features, including dial items, which we'll get into in a moment. And this is the bit.ly, which should lead you to a stack blitz. And if it doesn't, I'm so sorry. Pull that up right now if you want to follow along. Should lead you to a stack blitz. Okay. And I have to check the time. Okay, I think we're halfway through my section. We're gonna boog shug. Okay, I'm gonna get out of, let's see. I'm gonna get out of the keynote and I'm gonna share my main screen, and you all are going to see behind the veil. Okay, do you see? Yes, I think you do.
See a browser. Yep.
Awesome! We have one. Okay, I will stop celebrating and get on with it. So go, if you've pulled up that bit.ly, this is the first demo that we hopefully will successfully talk about. I'm going to move GoToWebinar over there so I can see the full thing. And I guess we should probably bump up font a bit. Is that crazy? Are you all right overwhelmed with font? Okay.
I've got my glasses on and I'm good.
Okay, so this is a modified version of the card you saw in the slides, and I'm going to go and pull him up. He's called Music Card Component, and as you see here, he's just beautiful card, but inside of it has the Kendo floating action button. And I don't know how legible that is. Do I need to change to this? Does that make it more legible? You tell me. If your eyes are bleeding from light mode, let me know, and I'll go right back to dark. But yes, so this, obviously the text that is displayed, the offset, and we're setting it Y offset of 175 pixels. If I go here and, we can show, like I'm moving it, it's moved up, right? It moves down, beautiful. Align, so you can set the horizontal and the vertical alignment, and then position mode, it's actually really cool, has absolute versus fixed. So right now, the card, absolute, you're not going to notice the difference. But if you had some large amount of content and you set it to position fixed, you could scroll, and of course the button would stay where it is, where you told it to float and be positioned. And then of course we're catching the click event. So this one's pretty simple, pretty cool. We're like, hey, yay, fine. He's music card, but notes is where the action's at. Notes is where the notes component, which is the one down here. I put some Blink-182 lyrics in there if any of you are fans, you're welcome. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is show dial items. I had my little note in here to show that. So if we scroll down, we have this list of contacts, which I've got myself, Carl, and TJ in. And so if we go up to our floating action button, I'm actually going to uncomment this. This is my reminder to talk about this first because there's so many things Tried uncommenting it and it just like double commented it. It was beautiful. There's so many things on this that I want to talk about, but the first one is, of course, dial items. And we need to make sure that we have both brackets. Yeah. Okay. So just to walk you through this real quick, we are now plugging in contacts to the dial items, but we're also setting the icon that you're seeing here is controllable, as well as, of course, the position mode that we talked about, and then capturing those open and close events, which we're going to dive into in a moment. But if I click over here, you should now be able to see these dial items that are coming up, as well as the icons changing. So if we scroll, this is what's happening. This is why we're plugging into icon, and it's because if the dial is open, we want the icon to change, and then we also want that layout, right? That grayish background. We want that to happen as well. And so it's beautiful. We've got these. I wanted to show on the avatars because this was my pick from one of our past releases of my favorite component. Of course, you can change the shape. So if we go in here and say, hey, shape equals circle, now our avatars are circles and looking gorgeous. And this is not us. These are these are stock images, but we're gonna pretend they are. And I made sure Carl had some cool glasses. So there you go.
Yeah, if that could potentially be me looking at it.
You guys were probably like squinting up at the screen, like, is that really me? It doesn't look like me. Okay, so let's keep moving. I want to show, okay, something that I wanted to show was the ability to have this open by default. Now, a share button, maybe not so much, but other options, really, really cool. If you go to, this is the article that I keep bragging about. If you go to the new component floating action button, check out our links in the docs. All of these things that I'm talking about are like, they're outlined and they're gone into for more detail, but there is one called, let's see, dial items, controlling the open state. And so there's sometimes that you might want the button to be open by default. And so I know the share is kind of a weird example, but I thought I'd go ahead and show that. So first things first, we're going to create a template variable. Where are we creating it? Okay, inside a floating action button, and we'll call it, I'm very verbose, so if you're like, why, Alyssa, why? I'm so sorry. That's me. So we're going to call it my floating action button, and then I went ahead and commented these out to speed us along, giving us action to that my floating button as the name of floating button. And then also we're going to do something with animations in a second. So essentially, if we go down all the way to the bottom, because that's where I feel like doing it, where is it? Okay, we're going to create an ng after view init. And I'm doing this in Stacklet, so forgive me if I hiccup. And then we're going to, first things first, let's just set it to open, right? So we're going to call out our floating button that we just gave ourselves access to at the top. And as I save this, you should be able to refresh your stack blitzes and see and play with it yourself. So true. So let's set it to true by default. And then I'm going to save this, and then we're going to go over to this browser window, and we're going to refresh. Okay, so by default, she is open. She is glorious. We've got those floating buttons of who we can share with, but we're missing a couple of things. The first that I noticed was the animation. It's driving me crazy because it keeps animating each time the page renders, but if it's open by default, it shouldn't be doing that. So I wanted to go ahead, and that's what this, I'm going to actually collapse my contacts. So hopefully we can, did it collapse? That's weird. I don't know why it's collapsing like that. Okay, so we're going to collapse our contacts, so hopefully we can see all of this at once maybe. So I created animation options, and we are going to go down here inside of this, and inside of a set timeout, we are going to call our animation options. And if we set them to true, save, think we should be. Bum, bum, bum. We're still animating. Okay, what did I do wrong? All right, let's see. Oh, maybe I need to set it to false instead of true. No, maybe. Save. No, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm going to move on to the next thing while I think about this, because I thought this was how I could access it. Let's go to the second thing that we're missing is the background is not grayed out anymore, which of course that's because we have not updated the dial open variable. So by default, the dial open is set to true after the view is initted. Oh, I know what I did wrong. So we're setting animation options, but we're not actually doing anything with animation options. We have to actually on the component itself. I'm such a silly Billy. We have to actually on the component itself set style item animation. Yeah, that's the one I want. To that animation options that we just set. Yeah, save. Did I spell it wrong? Of course it's not a capital. Why did I do such a thing? Okay. Yes, she's alive. All right, everyone watch carefully. Refresh. Yay. Okay, so.
I was just looking through our docs, desperately trying to find the cause behind this, behind the scenes.
That's silly. I've half the time I'll write something up and I'm like, why isn't it working? And it's like, you haven't done anything to the view. Why would it be working? So yeah, there you go. So check out that bit.ly if you're interested to play with this. Oh, okay, last thing, I promise. Where is it? Floating action button. I think it's theme. A theme color. Oh gosh, I'm totally riffing. Dark. Maybe I don't bind it like that. Yeah. Yes. She's alive. Light. Dark light. No. Am I doing that wrong? Hang on. Bear with me. The appearance. You have so much abilities here. Yeah, theme color. Did I bind it wrong? Bet you anything. I was like, yeah.
I don't recognize
color.
dark.
Did it?
Yeah, it definitely turned dark afterwards.
Light is a thing. Where is it? Let's see. Let's go back. Theme color. I'm on the floating action button. Let's try something. I think inverse.
Success.
Oh, you know what I bet it is? I bet it's because we are open right now. Let me try this on, because I wanted to change them both to dark because I feel like punk is kind of like a dark and brooding thing.
Yeah.
It's getting there.
Oh gosh, it is. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I love you all. We have to move on, but I was playing with it yesterday, having so much fun with, let me show you the example, playing with not only the colors, but the shapes, the sizes, and the icons that go in there. So definitely recommend heading on over to buttons/floating action button. And I did a boo-boo in the demo, but we are out of time. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. Bear with me. I'm not gonna mess up, I promise. Okay, and then we're gonna go back here and we're gonna be like, she's alive? Yes?
You're good.
Yeah, I think so. Awesome. So yes, sorry about the bumps in the road. I freaking, live coding, it's fun, but I love the floating action button. 10 out of 10, favorite component this release. Go check it out. But I think we have two more to cover before we get to the new features. So the text area, a long format of input, and it's just the Kendo UI Angular equivalent of the native HTML text area element. Here she is in all of her glory. And it includes the ability to integrate with forms or be standalone. And of course, the forms for reactive or template driven. Check out our docs. We've got a beautiful guide to get you started with either one. Custom adornments. So as you see with this specimen on the left, we have the image icon, the camera icon, and the settings icon here, but you can also do buttons and other things with the adornment options. And then the character count, which I made a little, yeah, you can see as you're typing, it's kind of like with Twitter. You can enable character count and it'll let you know when you're running out, and specify, of course, how long you want to allow that input to be. There is disable and read-only modes, and you can set initial row column sizes. So as you see, both of these text areas are different shapes, but you can also allow for vertical resizing, horizontal resizing, or allow for both. So depending on what your use case is and where you are. So it's a beautiful addition to the form component family, and check it out. I think the last one to wrap up our new set of UI components for R1 2021 is this wonderful expansion panel. And I know I said floating button was my favorite, but if I could have two favorites, I hear as a parent, I only have one child, but I hear as a parent you don't have favorites. So as a parent to all of these components, I'm not legally allowed to pick a favorite. But this one would definitely be a close runner-up. So check it out under Layout if you're looking for it. It's called Expansion Panel. And it provides a detailed summary view that enables the user to expand or collapse content. As you see here, this is its open form, its default form. And I'm going to walk you through. I don't actually think, you can't see my mouse. I'm like, no, you can't see that. Okay, so Christopher Robin is the title. A quote for you is the subtitle, and then the contents is the quote, and then you've got the little icon that changes. So if we go to the next slide, yes, an animation here of the box opening. Here is, yes, so besides just populating the expansion panel, of course you can control its look, and even its animation. So you see as this loops through, default animation, custom duration, and a no animation where it just pops into view. So if we go on over to this slide, yes. So the expansion panel provides the option to use an expansion panel title directive. And you're like, why would I care about such things? This is another story I had to tell. We were actually playing around with the expansion panel, and my friend was like, too bad you can't control the title. I really want to do something special with the title. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a way to do this. There's no way they would just give us an expansion panel and not give us a way to control the title. So of course, using ng template and the Kendo expansion panel title directive, you can override that title and subtitle that we saw earlier. You can override the whole bar actually. And so that is the directive, and this is the bit.ly. And what time is it? TJ, may I borrow some of your time, TJ? Just like 2 minutes, like extra.
Yeah, 2 minutes is no big deal.
Cool. Okay, sure. Because otherwise we're skipping the demo. So let me go and do this real quick. Hop out of here, pop back over here, and we are going to show the expansion panel demo. So that was the bit.ly link. You can also find me on, what is my name? Alyssa Michelle. I used to be Alyssa Michelle, and then I switched everything to Alyssa Nichol. So you can find me on Stacklets at Alyssa Michelle for a ton of Kendo UI examples. But the expansion panel example, if you did not catch that bit.ly, is right here. And so if we go into the template, because I can't do it. Everything in line inside the TypeScript file. I'm like, this isn't React. We have freedom here, people. So I made an HTML file. And here is your normal expansion panel that we saw in that first slide. I wanted to mention that you do have the option of setting expanded to true. So it's set to true on both of these, which means they're both open by default. Take that off. Of course, it's closed by default. And then as you boop-a-doo. Okay, so if we scroll down, you'll see here on this first one, it's the exact same content, but on this one, I'm overriding the title with an H1 inside with using that expansion panel title directive. If we keep going down, we actually have even more control. So using the expand icon or the collapse icon, you can set a class that will override this little caret arrow buddy. And so if you see here, this is great for things like font awesome, right? So you're saying, I want a plus, I want a minus, and now she is changing between a plus and minus on those states. But you can also do something crazy and fun, as you see up here, and it's being clipped, and I'm sorry, I was changing styles last minute, but she's gorgeous anyways without half of her eye. Where you can say, because again, it's just a class. You're applying a class when it's expanded, you're applying a class when it's closed. So mouth closed, if we go and check out my styles that I did not have time to separate out into their own style sheet, I apologize. We're just setting the content and the font size. And so when we click on that, it changes between the two, right? Easy peasy, lots of control, and it's a close runner-up for my favorite component. So I'm gonna go back over and we are gonna get on the road with the show. The screen, share that screen. Play button. And again, for any of you who missed it and want to play around with it, that is the bit.ly. Now it's the time that you've all been waiting for. That's right, our second Angular poll.
Woo!
What are your plans for Angular 11 this year? We are still around 340, 345 people. I would love to see the percentages on the plans. So, whoa, 75% I plan to upgrade to it. 20% I plan to upgrade. I have already upgraded to it. 14% I don't plan to use it. These numbers, of course, are changing as we're live. So keep answering. Love to see where this lands. But yes, what are your plans for Angular 11? Me personally, I like the hot module replacement feature. I upgraded as soon as I could, but I know you don't always have that option with larger projects and you're not necessarily steering the boat. Yay! So 48% I plan to upgrade. 17 I've already upgraded. Nice. I nod my hat to you. 17%. It's still pretty early on for adoption, so cheers to already being upgraded. And then 35% I don't plan to use it. I'm curious, I wish we could ask a follow-up question of like, okay, the 35%, you don't plan to use it because you're using Angular 1 or because you just refuse to upgrade or because you're not using Angular? I would love.
Yeah.
I'd love to know. Okay.
Yeah, for the non-Angular folks, they probably could easily quickly select that. But I think, end of the year shipping of a new framework version is the kind of the equivalent of trying to deploy on a Friday, right? So November 11th, it was fun, right? 11/11/11, like
it was great. It was beautiful.
But we know that, of course, with the holidays and everything like that coming up, it might be tricky. I
was on a call with the Angular team. I'm a GDE, and so we have monthly syncs. And I was on a call with them, and this was before the 11/11 release, and it was actually one of the GDEs that was like, it'd be really cool if you released on 11/11. And Stephen Fluin was like, and so it was so funny how hard they tried to make that happen. They were like, we've got to do it. So they loved it and it happened. But yes, I highly recommend switching to 11. All of our, spoiler alert, all of our components are up to date with version 11. So no fear with that. So there was so much content as far as new features. And this is the box that I give myself to fit these things in, right? I'm like, this is all you get, Alyssa. So I'm actually just going to list out the components that got upgrades. And then on the slides to follow, we'll go into what exactly was upgraded. So the grid and tree list, the list view, the tree view, the editor, the time picker and date time picker, the calendar and multi-view calendar, charts, and of course, as I mentioned, Angular 11 support. So technically all of the components got that. And I think I was talking to Carl, I think we're up to 80 plus. I really need a number, Carl. I need a number.
It constantly changes because we're constantly releasing new components, you know?
Yeah. When we hit 100, we should all get cake.
Yeah.
It's just an excuse to eat cake. Okay, so grid and tree list. What did they get? They both got access to our responsive pager, which you probably have used before on other elements of ours. But the cool thing about the grid and tree list using our responsive pager is that they dynamically change the content according to the available viewport of the grid or of the tree list. So here is, yes, I was going to pull these up. these are the individual docs, so tree list / paging, grid / paging to navigate to either one of those. But to enable the pager on either one, super simple, right? Setting pageable attributes to true, setting a default page size value, and maybe even handling a page change event. But check out our docs. They give you really detailed info on how to use the responsive pager. But if you ever used it on any of our other components, it's going to be the same flow of how to enable it and how to customize it. So check it out. Excited about the grid and tree list getting those upgrades. So accessibility is a big part of Kendo UI for Angular, and the list view is no exception to this role. So over the last couple of months, the Kendo UI for Angular team worked on adding built-in built-in. I sometimes say inline, and I don't mean it. So built-in keyboard navigation, along with a few other features. If I click this, you can read them out. So there's built-in editing or inline editing, and I don't know, I was like, I think the GIF is playing, where you can inline, say edit, change things, save, or delete items right within the list view. And then of course, with keyboard navigation, we are up to accessibility compliance. So check out the list view / editing for that new feature. The tree view now has filtering, AKA search. And let's see, there's the link. So tree view / filtering to check it out. And you use the Kendo tree view hierarchy binding directive and set filterable to true. And there is an example of a tree view with filterable equals true and the binding directive. So yes, I love the tree view, love that it now has search. Charts, so updated series highlighting. This is really, really cool. Inside of charts elements, you can check out series highlight. The highlight effect is applied only on hover or an active series, right? If you're hovering over a series, it changes its highlight effect. But now you can make that highlight effect more pronounced by changing the opacity of all of the other series around it. So essentially you're lowering their opacity to raise the detail of the highlighted area. So here's how you would do such a thing with highlight equal to an inactive opacity. And here we're just doing 0.3. So if we pull up it's gonna happen. I believe in it. There it goes. Pull up my video here of hovering and highlighting. You'll see that they really are much more pronounced now, and it's really, really easy to activate. So check it out. It's called Series Highlight for that feature. And we are wrapping up. I'm moving quickly. Here we go. The editor features. Yes. So I say features because there were so many things that were added. The first thing is support for more HTML elements. So this is our editor if you're not familiar with it, but expanding on the available features, you now have the ability to use even more HTML elements than before. Check out our docs for that full list. We also added custom schema support. And so supporting custom themes allows for the editor to support custom elements within its content, letting Angular developers expand on the available elements that the user can add. So those two things were added to the editor. Check it out, the schema specifically under editor / schema. Calendar and multi-view calendar. Woo! Okay, so for those of you who migrated from jQuery or ASP.NET MVC or ASP.NET Core, you may have noticed that the calendar and the multi-view calendar, they had a different design. So whenever we initially introduced Kendo UI for Angular, we revisited the user experience of the calendar and just threw out the old. We're like, this is what it should be. This is what it should have always been. But for customers, teams, individual developers that need to support multiple technologies with a single design, it might not have been the best because you were forced, if you're using Angular, to have this new look and this new feel. So now classic rendering is now available, and it's super easy to toggle between the classic view and the current view. So yeah, beautiful. Mwah, love it. Time picker and date time picker now have millisecond support. There are the links to those docs. And here is an example of when you have the long time activated with the milliseconds showing. So yes. as I mentioned before, Angular 11 support. I wrote a blog post. If you haven't migrated yet, or even if you have and you're not aware of all the new features, Telerik blogs Angular 11 arrived. And yes, as mentioned before, 11.11 on 11. It was beautiful. This is the command that you need to update. Join the cool kids on V11. Join us. All of the new components and the new features and all the old components and old features are supported. So there's no reason to wait. But yes, I always like to mention our feedback portal. Working with the team closely over the last 3 years has shown me how empathetic they are to the needs of our users. And so if you are having issues, if you need a new feature, if you need a new component, if you're jealous of jQuery's component and you're like, why don't we have one, right? We really do want to hear that. So please head on over there and give us the feedback. And we know that you have so many options to choose from for component libraries with Angular or with any of the other frameworks. So thank you so much for choosing Kendo UI. And please, please, please tune in tomorrow. It's going to be an all-day stream of us diving into these elements. So it's going to be awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pass the mic. I think maybe to TJ, question mark?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. That was really fun. And now I got to do the same configuration to make sure people are ever seeing anything. Can I get a sanity check that everything looks good?
Yes, indeed. Seeing
All
your
right.
slide deck right now.
Perfect. So I'm TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate on the KendoReact team. And I'm just going to start with a few just sort of heads up announcements. First of all, just a quick, just making sure you're in the right place. We're going to be here for about 2 hours today. This is the React segment of this. And if you're here for jQuery or Vue, just stay tuned. We're going to be getting to that here in a minute. Also, as Alyssa mentioned, we'll mention this a few more times. We'll be on Twitch all day tomorrow, and I'm just going to call it specifically that the React portion of that is 9:30 to 11. So I'll be there, Carl will be there. We have some people from the KendoReact engineering team as well. We're going to be hanging out and diving into this. So if you see something I showed today and you have some like really in-depth questions and you want to really get into it, show up tomorrow, come hang out with us, and we can dive into that. The last shout out I'll give is I also run a program every Wednesday called React Wednesdays, where it's basically a stream where I bring in cool people from the React world, and mostly they teach me something cool. So we had Chuck Pierce on yesterday. He taught me Volta, which is kind of a fun way of managing different node versions, a project for that. I've got Tanner Lindsley coming on in a few weeks. We've got Paige Niedringhaus to talk about React Enterprise apps. So check it out. It's every Wednesday. It's a quick thing we do, telerik.com/react-wednesdays if you want to learn more about that. But enough of the boring stuff, right? Like who likes announcements? Let's get into the actual features and the actual things that shipped as part of KendoReact. And like with Angular, there's a lot here. There's quite a few new components. There's new features. There's actually so many new features that I needed 2 slides, which is how you know it's a good release if you can't fit it all. One slide can't contain just everything that's there. And if you watched any of my webinars and such before, you might know that I kind of like to show these off live and in action in an app. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time just going through that list sequentially and looking at what these new features and such look like. But first of all, I know we have one poll for React. So why don't we go ahead and throw that up? And it looks like, all right, there we go. So how do you plan to use KendoReact in 2021? So are you either going to be using an internal UI component library that's based on KendoReact? Are you going to be using KendoReact as is across your Angular app or across your React apps? You're going to use a mix of KendoReact and other UI component libraries. Are you going to use KendoReact in a personal project or just for learning, or are you not planning on using KendoReact at all? So we'll give people a minute to fill it out.
There's quite a people saying in the beginning a mix of it, and now personal project and not planning to use it are leading. But I'm surprised at the number of mix. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. And I think the not planning on using it, we probably have some Angular and some people waiting around for Vue and jQuery as well. Yeah, this is a pretty healthy mix.
I just tried to answer the poll and it won't let me. It was like, you're not an attendee. No.
You're not allowed.
Don't mess up the data for us, right?
You skew the results. That is a good mix, like learning KendoReact with other stuff. Some people using KendoReact as a component library. So kind of fun that we have a little bit of a mix for everybody. All right, so what you're seeing now is my development environment. So what I have is I have a sample little app. I'm building an app here for good old Acme Industries, which is my favorite fictitious company, which actually I gotta make sure I got the starting point here. Sample app, and I've also got this same list of features. So this was the same features that I showed in the slides and that you'd also find in our blog post that announced for our release. And we're just gonna go through this list and take a look at these different components and try to build something cool with this. So the first on our list is the tile layout. And the tile layout, actually, let's bring this up in the same window. The tile layout is actually, it's kind of just a fun way of rearranging tiles that appear on the screen. So if you saw a list of segment on Angular earlier, you saw this, but it's actually based off the CSS Grid spec, which is just a fun way of dividing your UI into rows and columns. But what we're doing is adding some features on top of it, like the ability to rearrange things, sort of dashboard and widget style. So what I'm going to do for our good old Acme app is head into our home component, where currently I've just got these people just spilled out on the page kind of boringly. And no one likes boring UIs, right? We got to make this a little more fun. So I'm going to start by just bringing in the world's simplest tile layout. And I'm just going to tell this thing that I want 3 different columns and I have items. And the items, I'll bring those in, are just going to be basically an array of things. So you need to tell it what's going to be in the body of each tile, what's going to be the header, and where these things should be positioned by default. So this is just going to be, it's ended up going to be a column of 1, 2, or 3. And when I do this, I get this nice little UI by default. You can see that already, just without me having to do anything, I can sort of rearrange these across the screen. So this is almost creating like a kind of like a business card feeling-y sort of application. And if I want to, I could say, forget about the body and header. And actually, I'm just going to completely do my UI from scratch. So if I wanted to do a custom item, I could define exactly how I want this thing to render. So I could bring back the same formatting we had from before and still have this ability to drag and drop things around the screen. And I think the most common use case of this is something like dashboardy. Like I could like totally see like if you have charts or little like analytics type things and you want users to really be able to customize exactly what they're using. And so there's some other things you can do with these things too. Like you can configure whether these things should be resizable, right? Because you can do this sort of thing too. You can control whether tiles can appear in columns, or you can make them not resizable. You can kind of go nuts in terms of how you want to configure this. So I'd encourage everybody to check out the tile layout. If you do have one of these situations, you have something that's dashboardy or widgety, and you want to give users a bit of configuration in terms of how they want these things to look. So that's the tile layout. Next on our list, this is our favorite tongue twister of the webinar, the multi-column combo box. And I like to think of this, not with that long name, but I like to think of it as a grid within a dropdown. That's like my simple way of looking at this, because really it's a dropdown where you can provide users a little more context to help make a decision. So for example, if we go to the Acme app, Acme has a series of products, like good old fashioned Mark Gerbils and Maggie Tortoise and all these other things I'm randomly generating. And they also have a support form where basically you need to pick a product and tell support what product you need help with. Well, the thing is, when you're making that decision, you could provide a dropdown that just lists all the products, but sometimes it could be nice to provide some additional context to help know, like maybe you need to know the product's model number or something to help you remember to help make the correct decision. So let's add a combo box to this. So this is going to be on our support page. And if I scroll down, you see that the product is currently just an input within this field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill this input, and I'm going to instead replace it with a good old-fashioned multi-column combo box. And the API here is pretty simple. So the data is just a JSON of the data of, in this case, the products or whatever it is you're showing within the combo box. And then the column definition kind of looks like a grid, because that's basically what you're creating. You're creating a grid that users can basically select values from. And one other thing I want to show just very quickly is that the cool thing about these dropdowns is that you can use them on their own, but they also integrate well into the form controls that we have as part of KendoReact, our form APIs. So I could drop in a field that uses a combo box, and I can get the same sort of validation, right? Like if I leave these blank, I still get the same validation. I still get the behavior where Kendo is going to keep track of the state management of this for me, so that when I go to submit this form, I have this value as well. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. You have this more powerful UI to use, and you can still integrate that in with the form APIs if that's what you choose to do. Definitely cool though. I actually could see myself using this a lot, because I think there's lots of dropdowns where I want to provide like a richer UI. And if you go to the docs too, there's some other things you can do with this thing. Like Alyssa showed this as part of Angular too, but you can filter within this as well. So especially if you had like a really big list of things that you want to pick, you can have users just sort of select, just really start typing to help filter down the list. And there's virtualization as well. So, I mean, if you had a really big sort of combo box that you wanted to build with like thousands of rows, we can also help you implement that in a way that maintains sort of performance and accessibility as well. So you could check that out also.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when you mentioned filtering, is that, you know, just wait for those times when you are trying to load, you know, 10 to 100,000 rows in there. But we do it with the virtualization to help out, and of course filtering for users to be able to narrow things down a little bit.
Yep. And actually, so that dropdown, there's actually two new dropdowns that are a part of this release of KendoReact. So one was the multi-column combo box. The second is the dropdown tree. So the combo box I said was like a grid in a dropdown. The dropdown tree is basically a tree within a dropdown, which is, I think it's useful anytime you have sort of hierarchical things that you want the user to select between. And I think this, like I see this in the wild, usually for like filters, like shopping sites will have this sort of thing a lot, where you need to just sort of peruse around to find exactly sort of what you're looking for. And so Acme could use this as well. So if I wanted to filter between people that appear on this giant list, there's lots of people, like there's nuclear engineers, there's lobbyists, there's actors, lots of people work for Acme. It's a lot of talent at the Acme organization. So you need to be able to filter between this, of course. So
very diverse portfolio, by the way.
Yeah, it's not very often you see a meteorologist and an office manager, private investigator. It's crazy. But that's why you need to filter between them, right? Because how are you going to keep track of people? So I'm going to bring in a drop-down tree, and I'm going to use this to let us filter by location. So locations are hierarchical. You've got continents, like countries that you might want to dive into, cities as well. And the initial version of this looks a little bit intimidating because there's a lot of different fields that you pass. But a lot of these, in fact, like this bunch here, are just like keys, essentially constants saying what the name of the property is. Essentially, mostly what you need is a data set. So you got to tell KendoReact what's going to be in the tree, a way of storing the value, just knowing what the user selected, and what to do when the user actually picks something. And so I'll grab some code. This is mostly straight from the docs, so I'll show you where you can get this yourself. That does the actual grunt work behind this. The thing that's specific to this example is in that on change. This is where I'm actually doing the filtering of people and controlling what appears on the screen. So now when I go into filter, I've got this sort of tree that appears here, and I can see all of my people that work in Detroit or Boston or whatnot, and I can see things updating on the fly. And this code did come from just the straight example here. So you can grab this little bit of boilerplate that you need to make this possible from here. Like I said, it is quite relatively straightforward. You could also get into custom rendering as well if you want your tree to look a little bit different. I kind of like this one because I think this is also practical. File tree structures are also hierarchical, and these little icons are just a nice little touch to make this UI look a little bit nicer. So that's something that you can do as well. And form support as well. So if you wanted to throw a drop-down tree in a KendoReact form, that's something that you can do also. But that's the drop-down tree. All right, so we're making pretty good time here. The next one on the list is the floating action button, also known as the FAB button. This one has a nice acronym. Unlike like multi-column combo box, like MCCB doesn't really work, but fab button totally does work. And also I'm going to call out like a shout out to the whichever person came up with this joke. I'm going to give everybody a chance to read this real quick because this is A+, little Easter egg in the documentation for the fab button.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Although, like, I wonder how long it's going to be before people won't get the joke, like syncing an iPod. Like, I wonder what the age cutoff is for people that knows what syncing an iPod actually is.
Yeah, we might be the cutoff.
Yeah.
I think so.
But I'm going to add a fab button over here to the Acme app. We'll actually go to the same homepage. And underneath this tile layout, let me just grab what I want here. I'm just going to drop in a simple floating action button. The API for this one is incredibly simple, which is actually, I think, what makes it so nice. By default, you just tell it what icon you want to use, what items should appear. Essentially, this is optional, but if you want something to like pop out of the thing when you click it, that's an option you have. And then what should happen on click, which I won't go into an actual like live implementation of this thing now, but just to show you around the docs, the sort of thing that is possible. You can do things like control where you want the fab button to appear. I think it's most common in the bottom right, so I think that's why it's the default. But you can also get into controlling all sorts of things like colors, shapes, sizes, various things as well. You can totally customize the way this thing looks as well, like the items within it. Actually, this is the one I wanted to show. So if you wanted a completely custom UI to pop out of the fab button, that's something that you can do as well. Let's check that out. Fab button, we'll mark that off the list. Next one is the bottom navigation. This one's pretty nice too. I like that these component names are very descriptive because what do you know? It's navigation that goes on the bottom. Shocking, I know. But this is nice because this is one of those things that I think this is an incredibly popular just sort of app pattern. I mean, I see bottom navigation, especially on like mobile apps all the time. And it's also one of those that's kind of a pain. Like, it's not like it's the world's hardest problem to implement bottom navigation, but it's a pain to do and to get it to look right and get it positioned correctly. So having a component that does this out of the box to me is super nice and super valuable. So of course, Acme jumps on all the latest trends. So they're going to need bottom navigation in their application. And right now they're using a drawer. So another KendoReact component, the drawer component is being used for navigation. You can use that to bounce around this app. And what I like about the bottom navigation is it uses almost an identical API. So there's a nice bit of consistency. So what I can do is just toss in my bottom navigation, and I need to provide it items, which is again just going to be an array of what's going to appear in the bottom navigation. So actually it's up here, things like text and icons and which route to use when someone clicks on one of these things. And then the other thing I need to provide is what happens when the user actually picks one of these. So I can go up here, I've got my on select for the drawer. I can toss this in and I can type it correctly for what happens with the bottom navigation. And I've got navigation on the bottom of the screen, and I could use this, and super easy, super nice. I think this looks really slick as well. And the other thing too is I don't think, like, I'm not a UX person, but I'm pretty sure a UX person would tell you, don't like put the exact same navigation in a drawer and also in the bottom navigation. So maybe not the greatest decision, but hey, like Acme wants it all, right? So
we want navs everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Nav, and more nav. I do like having them both here just to show how like the API consistency just makes me happy. So if you are sort of experimenting and playing around with this, you can do this. I have seen like you can have drawers and bottom nav. Like usually I have seen them coexist as long as they do different things. So maybe bottom is used for navigation and you have some like settings or options in a drawer. So it's kind of nice that you can use the same API. You can put them all in one app. It's another just nice little building block that we provide as part of KendoReact. All right, so that is our bottom navigation. The next new component is the list box, which again, I love these descriptive names because what do you know? It's a list in a box. It doesn't get simpler than that. And usually when you use a list box, you actually use multiple of them because the idea behind this component is it gives you some way of managing lists, and usually just sort of moving things between different lists. So for Acme's perspective, because we want to show this off, Acme wants to do a little bit of a team building, and they want to divide people, or basically being able to move people between different teams. And so this is a great chance to just show off the list box. So what I'll do, this is my page, team 1, team 2, and what I will do is we're going to drop in the exact same list box actually for both of these. So list box 1 and list box 2, and all I got to do is make sure this list box uses the second team. And so now I got 2 teams of people. And for the list box, really all you need to provide it is an array of what's actually needs to show up in this list box. The text field is just, I just want to show the name of people or the name property. Selected as the name of the property that can control which of these things is selected. So KendoReact has a thing to manage it. And on item click, this is just going to do a little bit of logic to basically make this bit of highlighting that you're seeing here work. But the list box on its own, not super valuable. The magic happens when you actually connect these things. So to do that, there is a prop called toolbar that you could use to basically provide the stitching or the wiring up between the 2 list boxes. And you need to provide a list of tools. So transfer to, from, move up, move down. You need to provide basically the 2 data sets that you are connecting, and then what should happen when the user actually clicks on one of these things. So if I want to move May over to team 2, I can do that. I can rearrange things around, I can move things around. And it's a pretty nice seamless experience. You can implement this in not a whole lot of code. And there's some other things you can do. So the list box section in the docs is where you check this out. You can also do drag and drop. So this is kind of nice. Like if you want to be able to use your mouse and drag things around between lists, you can do that as well. You can show more, just more robust things. So I was just showing a simple name, but if you have something that's rendered a little bit nicer that you want and want to have users manage those between lists, that's an option as well. And you could also do multiple lists. This is actually, I think, probably the most, this was the first thing that came to my mind when I saw a list box of something I'd want to do, is like if you have a number of tasks and you want to control like where they are in a status, like not done yet, in process, done, shipped, that sort of thing. List boxes can be used to manage that, and it's a kind of nice UI for dealing with that. All right, so we're almost to the end of our new components. And actually the last one is a pretty simple one, icon and SVG icon. And really this one, it's a super simple component, but it's just a nice little convenience utility to have, because if you're like me, you can never remember names of these things or whatnot. So icon, let's go back to our home screen. And this tile corresponds to what the user is actually seeing here. And what I want to do is replace this bit with a handful of icons. So this is the same code as before, except that I dropped in 3 of these icons. And I like it because, again, this component is super duper simple. You actually only need to pass it a name. That's it. And then you could also use this theme color if you want to. And there's some other options, like there's size and some other things that you can do to customize this. But I'm using that to give it some nice color, so these icons really jump out. But they're really simple, but everybody needs icons. It's common. I think, Carl, do you know how many icons we have in the library? It's
400 plus. Yeah.
400 plus. So there's a lot. So it's just nice to have, because I know me all the time. I'm building something, I want to show just a little icon. It's just nice to have just a little easy convenience component I can drop in and just make it dead simple for me to put it in. And there's icon, there's also SVG icon. So the only difference, the API is identical, but icon is implemented with font icons, font icons, and SVG icons are SVGs. So depending on your personal preference of which you like, which you prefer, you can switch between them. The API is exactly the same. All right, so that is the end of our new components. Let's see, we're doing all right with time. So let's quickly go through the new features because there's some pretty cool stuff. And some of these are actually going to be pretty fast to go between because, for example, React 17 support, there's not much to mention here other than we have it. So if I look at my app here, you'll see that this is using React 17. It should be safe for you to upgrade. If you do run into problems, let us know, but we've tested pretty extensively. And so React 17 should be good to go for you. It should just be a quick and seamless upgrade. There's no actions that you need to take. Next thing is built-in keyboard navigation. This was surprisingly cool. So I know Alyssa had favorite features. This might be my favorite feature. And I'm actually going to open this up in Chrome, and you'll see why here in a second. So we've always had keyboard support as part of Kendo UI, well, just Kendo UI in general. We are pretty good about providing full accessibility support. But this is a new feature that allows users to just really seamlessly navigate around some of our more advanced components. So once I install these, and the reason I'm using Chrome is Chrome has this option that lets you like make your focus highlight like obnoxiously big, which is a little bit annoying unless you're doing a demo, in which case it's super nice to have. But with this keyboard navigation on, check out how I can just sort of peruse around this grid, and I can just sort of do these sort of things. And you don't normally think of using the keyboard. Like I would never think like see a grid and say like, oh, I definitely want to use the keyboard on here. But after playing with this for a few minutes, like it's surprisingly nice and easy to use. And I could totally see myself actually using and doing it.
That's what the list box made me think of, because I was like, why would you need the buttons? Like, why wouldn't you just drag and drop? And it's like, obviously, like to be able to interface with the keyboard. And so that, yeah, that's really cool.
Yep. And if you want to enable it for your grid, there's a navigatable property, a new prop that you can set to true to turn it on. And it's also in the tree list, it's also in the editor, and it's also in the Gantt as well. So same property, just turn it on, try it out. It's pretty nice, pretty easy to use. I like it.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to what TJ mentioned, we outside of the Gantt, which actually just also got keyboard navigation added with this release, all the other components have had keyboard navigation already built in, but it was up to the developer to control specifically what they're looking to do with every keyboard interaction. When we talk to a lot of our customers, customer A has certain requirements, customer B has other requirements, and they don't always line up. So our initial kind of foray into this, right, was to ensure that, yeah, you can do whatever you want to, you just have to kind of roll it yourself. And this is just trying to make that a little bit simpler for folks that are just looking to get off the ground running, have essentially what you can think of like the basic keyboard navigation taken care of. And of course, you can customize it if you'd like to as well, right? If you need to go in with some very custom keyboard shortcuts and combinations and everything like that. So sky's the limit here, but this is just to make things make you a little bit more productive, I guess we can say, when it comes to this particular feature.
Yeah, because it's not like, and it's also not like the components not listed here don't have keyboard navigation, right? It's obviously very important to us on really the entire Kendo UI team to make sure our components are accessible. This is just like more of an opinionated, this is what we see people commonly wanting out of the just a sane way of moving around some of these more complex components, and just a way of shipping it as a default that's easy to get and easy to use. And so next on our list, we got a few more things to get through. Next on our list is the grid. So this is another one where, kind of like React 17, really all you need to do is bump up your version number and you get this feature for free. It's not something that you actually have to enable. But we spent a lot of time with this release working on our performance, especially performance related to data binding. Really, it's a lot of, if you're using big grids, we're just basically a little bit smarter about when we re-render and when we remount, especially for large data sets. So when you upgrade, hopefully you'll see a small little performance boost if you are dealing with more complex stuff. If your grids are more simple, you probably will be something you might not even notice at all, but just a nice little optimization in there for you. The Gantt got a really big feature, which is built-in editing. And I'll make this full screen here because I think that the Gantt deserves the full screen. Now, the Gantt component is something that we shipped as part of our previous release. And the initial version of the Gantt was read-only. Essentially, you brought in data and Gantt provided you a way of just visualizing that data. Well, with this release, you're now actually able to additionally edit the data as part of this. So for example, I can click on items that appear within the Gantt, and I can change different data and see it rendered immediately. I can kill tasks. I didn't want to validate this with customers anyways, so guess what? I no longer have to do that. You could add new tasks. So you could say whatever here and save this. You can like rewrite dependencies on the fly, right? Control which tasks are dependent on what. So there's a lot here. I'm not going to go into the implementation of this because the Gantt is a fairly complex component and there's a lot here. We are doing our Twitch session tomorrow. That'd be a great one to check out if you are using the Gantt and you want to dive into exactly how this stuff works. But this is a pretty big feature just because you now have the Gantt, which is a pretty awesome component in the first place. It's now fully editable as well. So if you are using the Gantt, definitely check that out and let us know what you think. All right, we got a few more minutes, which is perfect because we got two last features. So the first is the avatar, which is another one of those, Alyssa brought this up too. It's just like a handy little component that I use all the time. So it's just nice to have a shortcut. And the avatar isn't new, but we spent some time just making the API make a little more sense and adding a few additional options to it. So I've already got an avatar. It's up in my app bar up here. And there's a few additional things that I can do to it now. So I could make it big. I'll make a giant version of myself show up there.
I swear, if your version of Avatar is cooler than my version of Avatar, I'm going to be upset.
So we can make it big. We can also, so we can change the theme color as well. I love the IntelliSense too. Like that's super nice. So we'll change the color. And actually, I think to make the color change, we got to kill, because images can't have colors. So we can make this initials. I can see my initials really huge if I want to. Actually, let's bump that back down. But just some things that you can do to customize these things. There's some other options that I'm not totally remembering. And another thing I'll mention too is part of our effort with this release and subsequent releases is to give some consistency to these APIs that we're providing throughout our components. So you've noticed this theme color, for example, appearing on several different components. This is something we're bringing to additional components as well. Also things like size, shape, and some of these other things as well. So you can look forward to this coming to other components like the button and the input and such in future releases as well. All right, oh, perfect. All right, we got one last one, and that is the scheduler. So the scheduler has two new features, and let me just clean this up. The first of which is the current time marker, which is the easiest one to show. So Acme has a calendar, and you'll see that actually that feature is right here. It's basically just a little marker that appears in the scheduler that shows what the current time is. So I think Outlook does this as well. It's just nice to know because if you're like me, you can't keep track of the time anyways. So it's just nice to know what the current time is. This is a new prop that's on by default. So if you just update your version of the scheduler, you're going to see this line in your schedulers, in your calendars, just out of the box. But there is a prop there. So if you don't like it, you can also turn it off as well. And you could also configure it. You could have it on like just the day view or the month view. That's something that's available as well. But there is also this ability to now build custom forms and custom form editors that's part of the scheduler as well. And to give you an idea, actually, I'll just show this directly within Acme. So if you use the scheduler, you are probably aware that there is the UI built into it where you can edit the entries on your schedule. So if I get super excited about my meeting with Golden West Financial, I can do this and I can save this. But this form you've seen here before is basically something that we generate as part of KendoReact, which is super cool. It makes your life a lot easier. But we also realize that you might want to customize some of the stuff that's appearing here for whatever reason. And new with this release is basically some extension APIs to let you get in and either make tweaks to that form, like small little things you might want to change, or you even have the ability to just rip that form out entirely and implement it with something that's completely your own. So I want to implement one that I got from the documentation just to give you a quick idea of how this works, and we'll use this as a way of wrapping up. So what I can do is I can provide a new form prop, which you start by spelling it correctly. And we'll say form with custom editor. and I'm going to paste in the implementation here from the docs. And this looks like a lot, but it's actually not that bad. Basically, what I'm saying is take the scheduler form. So this is the one that's just built into KendoReact, and just use everything as normal. But I'm going to actually override the validator because I want to provide some custom validation to how this thing works. And the one that comes from the docs is a do one that just shows how, like, for example, suppose you wanted to do some validation around the title of these forms. So once I save this, what I should be able to do is go in here, and if I put in, less than 40 characters, the form is now going to enforce that I need to type in at least 40 characters. And I like to add, we'll see if I can quickly add one here, because one validation that I wish existed on the calendars I have to work with is something around the end date. So let's add one more thing of validation. So let's write a end validator. And what we'll do is we'll take this one and we'll copy it. We'll call it end validator. And so instead of just checking the title, let's do end dot get hours through 17. And we'll basically yell at people like, do not we'll yell at people for trying to schedule meetings after 5, right? And we got to put this in this array.
Are you using like an extension to get
the emoji thing?
Yeah.
It's an app called Rocket for the Mac.
An app?
It is an app, and so you give it accessibility settings, and then if you type a colon anywhere, you can get completion for emojis in any app.
You've just changed my world. Sorry.
It's so good.
Also, I should know, every time you write a Meg, I think that you're about to blame Megan specifically, and in my head, I'm like, oh, who do I know that TJ has run into?
Megan.
But there you go. So now you have this ability to yell at people that schedule meetings after 5 o'clock. And just in general, like, I'd encourage you to look through the documentation on this if you are using the scheduler and you do want to customize things, because there is a lot here. So this is under scheduler, customization, and form. So look through the form and the form editor section because it talks through in a lot more detail. You can do more than just customize the validation. Essentially, there's a lot of different things that you can do. All right, we'll check the last item off of our list. I'll give one last shout out here before we wrap up. One tool that I want to plug, and this is actually for more than just KendoReact users, we have a template wizard that is built into VS Code. So actually you can go to the extensions list in VS Code, and if you just search for Kendo or Kendo UI, this should pop up, the Kendo UI template wizard. And basically it's just a way that you can scaffold out Kendo UI apps. And you can do it with either KendoReact, Kendo UI for Angular, or Kendo UI for Vue. We recently added it as well. So just you can scaffold out new apps. I'd encourage you to try this out if you're a VS Code user. And also we have this link down here to let us know what you think. So if you like this, we'd love to know about it. If you hate it, tell us as well. And actually, if there are things, if you're a VS Code user and there's things that you wish there were some shortcuts you had for Kendo UI, also let us know about that, because we know a lot of you are VS Code users and we want to do what we can to help you out. All right. And I'll just to wrap up here, I'll do one last shout out. If you do have any questions and want to dive into more details, we'll be at Twitch tomorrow. I specifically will be there from 9:30 to 11 Eastern time, along with other React people to talk React things. I'll do one last shout out for React Wednesdays, telerik.com/React Wednesdays. If you want to come talk React with me every Wednesday with cool people, check that out as well. But yeah, that's it. Oh, last shout out. If you like the Acme app and you want to look at what I do, it's on GitHub/my name/Acme. So check that out. I think that's it. Am I doing it on time, Carl? Are we good?
Yes, more or less nailed it. So we are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and take over. And as I do that, by the way, folks might hear my cats in the background because they are hell-bent on trying to break into the room. So I apologize if you hear that, but also they are way too dramatic. that meowing is coming from outdoors simply because they want to break in. So let's see here. All right, perfect. So I think everybody can see my screen. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about what's new in Kendo UI for jQuery. Just as a quick little agenda here, what we can see, we had a ton of new components. Some of the ones that you've seen in Angular and React, if you've already spent the time with us today looking into those. So we had the floating action button, we had the bottom navigation, the expansion panel, and then two new components we also had are the radio group and the checkbox group. So these build upon our previous efforts of creating the checkbox component as well as a radio component. And then we've added some grid updates, list view got some additional features, tile layout features. We added a couple of things to the editor, and then we also added some accessibility updates. And one thing that I should also mention is that during this release, we focus even more than usual on squashing bugs. So we've had this huge bug fixing effort to kind of ensure that the R1 2021 release of the Kendo UI for jQuery components is the most robust release yet. So that is something that's kind of sneakily behind the scenes, of course. We don't necessarily always talk about the bug fixing effort that goes on, but I just like to emphasize that because we did spend a lot of time with this release cycle to make sure that we cover as many things as possible alongside with the new components. So what I'll do is I'll cover all the components just in the slide deck first and then jump over to the demos. So starting with the floating action button, we've kind of seen this already, right? In this particular screenshot, we're using the floating action button as a way to be able to add a new item into the data grid, as an example. So the floating action button is a contextual component that essentially allows you to control one specific action if you just have the one single button on the page that either is tied to a specific element or it could be across your entire application. For example, while it's not necessarily in there in the latest design, Gmail had this for a long time with that little plus icon that eventually turned into a compose icon in the right-hand corner, even in the desktop version of the application. Of course, the speed dial option that we have there, right, with adding additional items, that can also be achieved on the jQuery side. Now, the bottom navigation component, if you took a look at what TJ just presented, it's the same type of component, right? It provides you with that, as the name gives away, a navigation at the bottom of your application. So this it ties in very well with anybody doing either if they like to have that in their desktop web design, which I have seen that happen. But I think, excuse me, I think that you do see that quite often on mobile devices as well. Where, of course, if you're doing any sort of responsive design, or maybe instead of the drawer, you like having the bottom navigation take over as the screen real estate gets a little bit smaller. It's a super easy to configure and set up component that, of course, has responsiveness baked in. So all you really have to do is add it to your application and you're good to go. The expansion panel is another layout item that we've created that allows you to, just like this screen is showing off, right, gives you a header with a title and a subtitle, as well as a content area that expands and collapses. As some of you, and I noticed this question popped up actually in the questions as we were showing that off in the other suites, we're wondering, okay, what's the difference between an expansion panel and something like the panel bar or the accordion, depending on what language you use for naming that component. And the main difference really is that the expansion panel is simply there to expand and collapse content, while the panel bar or accordion probably is potentially data bound, might be used as a navigational element, right? And might not necessarily be the perfect thing that you would shove in the middle of your application to expand and collapse. And while we show it off here with multiple expansion panels built on top of each other, there are several cases where you might just want to have a single one added into your application. So it's a neat little component that has a lot of flexibility baked in. As you saw with the list of sessions, she even updated the icon for expanding and collapsing to throw in some emojis. So you have a lot of power of what you can do with this, even if it looks initially simple to begin with. All right, now the radio group is quite simply, if you are in a situation when you need to have multiple radio buttons, which chances are for using the radio button, you are, the radio group just provides a way for you to be able to manage a list of radio buttons. So instead of just having a single one, if you have 2, 3, 4, however that might be, whether it comes to validation or selection and how that operates, that's where the radio group comes in. And if I jump over to the checkbox group, it's going to be the same thing there. So checkboxes might be something where you probably will have multiple and they can be selected in different ways. And you might want to be able to control something like this, for example, selecting all, or how to handle, again, validation when you're selecting across a list, right? So just think of these as anytime I need more than one of either the radio group or the radio button or the checkbox, I probably will want to lean on the checkbox group or the radio button group. All right, so that's the new components. In terms of grid enhancements, we've added a couple of things. One, we added a new way to organize and view our column menu. So I'll cover the differences in the demo here, but it's essentially just an update and a tweak to how we structure everything in our column menus. We keep on adding features in here. So what we're trying to do with this new twist on things is to organize it to make it a little bit easier for folks to be able to go through and maybe not have so many floating out menus, and instead try to make things a little bit more concise within the context menu when it initially renders, but also, of course, still give you the same power and same flexibility of displaying everything in there. So just a tweak that can be turned on or off depending on the configuration option. So for those of you that are just upgrading and you don't want to take advantage of this, we won't break anything, you have to turn it on. So it is something quite easy to work with. We also, by the way, I should mention, and this isn't something that I have in a screenshot, we added the ability and actually did this through a knowledge base article, how to include images when you are exporting the grid contents to Excel. There's a lot that goes into images, as you are aware. There are a ton of different image formats. So this does involve a little bit of a deeper dive, depending on which image formats you're looking to utilize, but that's something that we also added in with this release. Now the list view added the ability to do grouping. So we can see here that we have a list view that showcases off different locations in different countries. And in this particular case, we've added grouping around the country. So Spain, we can see that we have the title for Spain. We have our cards that showcase the various different locations that we might want to visit in Spain once we can all travel again. And then we also have the ability to do something like, for example, 3 destinations in Spain. So we have that little informational snippet around something related to the group. Whenever we group, there might be a total count. There might be something else that we want to kind of toss in there. So in this particular case, we're just counting the number of available items in each group. Now the tile layout, which is something that we added with the last release, so in R3 2020, we already have some requests for features, and one of those that we added in with this release is the ability to add or remove tiles. So this GIF, as you can see, we're dragging tiles that are already available over from the right-hand side into the main surface, and then the existing ones, once they're added there, you can see we have that little X button to be able to remove them. So this again goes into the idea of whenever we are working with the tile layout, ultimately it's the end user that is working with what we're displaying. So it might not just be a read-only view, right? Because at that point we might as well probably just use the CSS grid, for example, in order to be able to display something. But in this case, because we're adding interactivity, we also wanted to take it to that next step where, okay, maybe there are other KPIs, for example, that the user wants to be able to show, and they might not be so interested in this other piece, right? So they can remove them, they can tweak them that way as well. On the editor side, we added the ability for you to list out lists with Roman numerals, which I know is something that folks have been looking for. So we can actually see this tool here in the toolbar next to the 1, 2, 3. We see the Roman numerals I, and I. I don't know actually if that's how you are supposed to mention Roman numerals, but there we go. If it's not, that's perfect. But anyway, so you can quickly switch between them. Actually, I'll show you what that looks like in the demo. We also added the ability for you to align tables within the editor. So I believe, no, actually I did not have an image for that, but I'll show you in the demo. But essentially, once you have a table out within the content of the editor, this new tool just allows you to be able to either left align the table, center it, or right align it. And finally, some accessibility updates. So I'll just list these out here. So we did various accessibility enhancement across many components. I know that sounds kind of generic, but essentially what we did is we did a thorough review of a lot of our components, which we tend to do with every release, but this was an extra effort that we went through to ensure that, okay, if there are any minor pieces that we could address to be able to make our components that much more accessible, we should. Of course, dealing with all the complex components that we have, there are sometimes some interesting scenarios that we run into with accessibility. So we want to make sure that we take care of those. So we focus on that with this release. We also added keyboard navigation to a couple of our existing components, specifically the scroll view, the drawer, the timeline, and the tile layout components. So that is something, of course, that's also important to ensure that we can be as accessible as possible. So those four components, some of them pretty new. We just added the keyboard navigation too, and that can be turned on or off with a quick configuration option. But all right, let's jump into the demos. I know I promised demos. Have just a couple of minutes to go through these. So what I'm going to do is find the right window, and here we go. So everything that we covered today is available on demos.tirelessly.com/KendoUI, or if you just go to demos.tirelessly.com, you can find the Kendo UI link there. Anything that is new has a new tag associated with it. Anything that's updated has an update next to it. Nice and easy, right? All right. Let's take a quick look at the floating action button. So we can do something like this, where we just add to queue, and we see now that a dialog pops up and says, okay, we added to new. Or we have this speed dial, as it's called, that pops up that allows us to define items. So it's not just one single contextual thing that you can do. It's more, okay, what are the actions I can do across this particular UI element? The way, let me zoom in a little bit, that we implement this, and one of the reasons, by the way, I like showing off our demos is because all I needed to do was go from example to view source and have the ability to dive into the source code here. And if I zoom in maybe just a little bit more, we can see that setting up a floating action button is fairly simple, right? We just grab the element that we want to be able to work with, and then a button most likely, right? To make sure that we're doing things correctly. And then all we have to do is define the text. We can set the position mode to absolute or fixed, depending on if you want the floating action button to follow along when you're scrolling or not. And then we have some aligning properties we can set. We can also do an offset to determine precisely where on this element we are placing the component. And then, of course, a click event is very critical for anything where you're clicking on, right? If we dive into what we would need to do for the speed dial, we have this items property where we can pass in an array that just has a couple different properties we set for each individual item. So the label, for example, icon, and click, of course, again, because we want to be able to do an action whenever one of these items are clicked. We do have a lot of different options that you can select from and dive into, of course, if you'd like to. So with any one of these demos, I highly recommend taking a look at the API for each of these so that you can get a full understanding of, okay, what if there might be some other type of customization that I want to do, or for example, we have templates you might want to work with, etc. So that's a good thing to dive into to see what else you can do with the component. If I jump into the bottom navigation component, we'll see here, it's similar to the screenshot I just had, right? The bottom navigation is there on the bottom. And if I jump in to view source, we will see, I scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. We have a lot of content here, right? But again, as simple as we can define an item template, first of all, if we'd like to, which gives us the flexibility to, and we see here that we even do that on just one item in this particular case. So you don't have to have the same template across all components. You don't need to define a template and then be stuck with it. So you can do that on an item by item basis. We can set the position mode again to be absolute or fixed, for example, and then we just pass in some items, which very familiar structure if you worked with any one of our other data-bound components. And you even have the ability to pass in some additional data here if you'd like to as well. All right, it probably seems like I do these rapid fire, but I got to make sure I also cover the view components when we get to those, right? So hopefully this all makes sense to everybody. So the expansion panel what we've done here is that we've just defined a couple of divs, right? So we gave them some IDs so they're easy to grab with jQuery. And then we just have some content within the divs, nice and simple and easy. So in this particular case, then for Brazil, we have this div, we have the content. So we select it with the jQuery selector, call Kendo expansion panel, and then we set the title and subtitle. That's how you get that nice little, if I go back up here, that's how we get this content, as well as the content over here. And that's really it. That's how easily you can set up an expansion panel. And then of course we have an expanded property that you can work with in order to determine if it should be expanded and open by default when the page opens or not. And of course you can also control this as well programmatically if you'd like to for any reason. All right, have to hydrate. The radio button, or the radio group, sorry, the collection of radio buttons, continues to kind of follow a similar pattern to what we've seen before, right? Where in this case, we define an items collection, and then we can just pass in text here if we like to, and then it automatically, so to say, populates all the options that we might need in terms of defining radio buttons that we want to add into this group. So you didn't even have to go through the process of defining the entire layout yourself. You could just pass in items, have them be passed in via text, and you're good to go. So you can, of course, take the approach of defining everything a little bit deeper and more customized if you like to, but I personally like the simplicity of this, or just how easy it is to be up and running with getting that full control over this group just by defining the items. And then you have the options for layout and a couple of default values that you might be able to pass in, for example, and then of course you can pull out the value pretty easily. If I jump into the checkbox group, we'll see that it's a similar setup here where I call the Kendo checkbox group. Really, the only reason this looks more complicated is because we are expanding each of the items, so you can make this a little bit easier to read. But if you want to, you can of course just do this on a single line, but we're passing in a label, a value for each individual item. And after that, we're really good to go. We can pass in some initial values, right? So we can determine which ones are selected and which ones are not selected. And what's nice is, if we see here the select all checkbox, all we need to do is use the check all function in order to be able to pass in true or false to select or deselect all the elements within the checkbox group. So nice and easy element to work with for sure. All right, the column menu in the grid, as I mentioned, we have a couple different options for you to work with here. Hopefully, and now that I'm so zoomed in, this will still be okay. But as you see here, I've set this to modern out of the box for this demo, which you can see actually if you scroll down to the column menu here. So modern is a new look and feel where if I go into these individual items, so for example, for the columns, to select what columns to display or the filter, right? It's all expanded and collapsed. If I switch to classic, which is the default that we have right now, you can see here that the columns and the filter, they fly out with the sub menu, right? So this is really just a question of, do you prefer it one way or the other? We just updated this because based on some feedback, and we also just wanted to take a stab at organizing things a little bit more to prepare for any future features that we might add into the column menu. If you're looking to figure out how to export images that are in the grid when you're doing an Excel export, we do have this knowledge base article, and Alyssa mentioned that we have a blog post, of course, for the what's new in Angular, but we did the same thing for jQuery, and we have the what's new page, which will link to this knowledge base article so you can have it on hand. There is some code that goes into this just because images, there's so many different image formats and there's a lot to get into here. We don't necessarily have time for that here, but just if you need that, here you go. Here's the knowledge base article, nice and easy to find. Now, grouping in the list view, as I mentioned, right, it's just takes the list view, which already is data bound, and just adds grouping into it. If I jump into the demo source code here, we don't need to worry too much about the template and everything like that. That's not what we're here for. We have the destinations. The destinations have country, title, description, and image URL. And if I scroll down, we now have the data source. So anybody that uses kind of UI components on the jQuery side are familiar with the data source. So it's very similar to how you would set up grouping within our data grid, for example, right? You're using the same group field, and within that you have an object that you can work with to define what field that you want to group on, if it's descending or ascending in terms of direction. And then we also have the ability for you to pass in some additional functions in terms of figuring out, okay, how do you properly compare what we have between, two different objects, right, as you're going through the collection of items. And then you just pass it into the list view, and boom, you have your grouping enabled.
It's magic.
Exactly. I like magic. I really do. Adding and removing tiles in the tile layout, I just wanted to show people what this looks like. So we have this interface over on the right-hand side, which I can continue to just add items into. Maybe not that one because I'm breaking the layout, but if I close this out, I should be able to drop that in. Oh yeah, I actually added it down below here. So I have some control over what I do with each individual item actually, so I can control where it gets, potentially where it gets added. But then I can still, this demo doesn't necessarily show that off, but I can still then do, resizing, I can drag items around, etc. This is more just specifically focused on showing how some items you can add and some items you can keep so it doesn't get removed, for example, like this chart. Or if you just have this kind of collection over the right-hand side as well of tiles that you can drag.
I know for the Angular one, you can disable dragging for certain tiles. Is that
yes. Yep, that's the same thing here. Yes, exactly.
Also, this company is crushing it, man. 35,000 new customers, 2,700 new deals, man.
Yeah, this company is it's actually GameStop that we're following. So $GME, everybody. All right, so finally, for the jQuery bits, we have the editor, which, as I mentioned, Roman numerals, right? So right now we have trip highlights that are using a regular bulleted list. And if I want to make this Roman numerals, it's very easy. I can just select that here. I can make it, I guess they can be uppercase or lowercase. I don't know enough about why you would select one over the other, but anyways, you have that as an option. And then, as I mentioned, we also have the ability for within the table that we have here, we can do things like left align, right align, or just on the particular table that we're dealing with, so that it can sit in different. You can see here, so we can align it to the left, the mid, center, or the right. Just through these tools. So I know there's a lot of tools. When you look into the all tools demo, we have a ton of features in here. So I think it's just easier to kind of take a look at this. And luckily, when you highlight over something, you can see specifically what it's responsible for. So that makes it a little bit easier. All right, slightly over time on the jQuery piece, but there's just so many things to cover. But I'm going to make sure that we finish on time and also cover what is new in for Vue. So for you Vue users out there, and that was kind of hard to say fast, we have a ton of new things on the native side of things, right? So if you're familiar, we initially took our jQuery components and we wrapped them for Vue as kind of initial stopgap, and then we've been rolling out native components that are built from the ground up specifically for Vue. So with this release, we have the multi-select, the window, a slider, the time picker, and the date time picker. And we also had a couple of grid improvements along the way. So the multi-select, you can see here in the GIF, right? It's a drop-down that you can type into, or you can select items from, whichever way, but you can select multiple items. They can pop up as text or as a token, as we see here. You can easily remove by clicking on that X. So that kind of helps us round out the drop-downs that we have available within the suite. The window, it's pretty self-explanatory by the name, right? It provides you with a window that you can drag and drop around the page. It's a little bit different than a modal dialog, for example, which might pop up in the middle and stay stagnant and just sit there. So this is flexible with being able to be dragged around. You can minimize it, you can close it and open it, and you can do a ton of different things just from the configuration options available. And of course, the content inside can be completely customized, so you have a lot of flexibility there as well. Slider, It's a nice and easy and lovely component, right? It just gives you a way to be able to manipulate a value that's easier than just typing in, and a little bit more fun than typing in, 10 or 5 or whatever, just using a regular input. This gives users the ability to either use the buttons on the right-hand and left-hand side, or just drag that handle left and right in order to be able to select the value. And you can control the interval of the labels and what values they represent, etc. The time picker allows you to select a time, so you can either type that in with the keyboard, or you can click on the drop down you see here. Then this nice interface pops up that allows you to select from hours, minutes, AM, PM. You can of course set this up to be a 24-hour clock as well if you prefer that, and that's just a configuration option, and you're off to the races. So both keyboard input as well as a nice little visual way of displaying how to select time. I think for anybody that started with iOS, right, they were kind of the first ones to implement this nice little way of scrolling hours and scrolling minutes, and now we have that flexibility as well on the view side. The datetime picker, I'm tossing that in there real quick because it also takes the time picker, takes the date picker, and it smushes it together, and then you get one single component that provides the date initially, and then the time. Again, you can, right now, this particular input is a little bit smaller, so you don't see the entire string of the selected value, but you can, of course, make that wider so people can see, but you start with this tabbed interface of first the date and then the time. You can configure which one you prefer, but we just do that because of the format that we have up there. So it just gives you this one ultimate component. If you need a user to select both date and time, and you as a developer prefer to have that as one single object as opposed to trying to mush two things together programmatically, you can take advantage of that right here with the datetime picker. And finally, on the grid improvement side of things, we added the ability for you to be able to filter and actually be able to find the values that are currently within the grid and be able to select which ones to include or which ones to not include. So instead of typing in what you like to filter, you can just manually check things off or check all of them. It's just a different way of filtering. People that work within Excel, of course, love this feature. They are used to that way of filtering, so we've added that in. And we also, similar to what we did on the React side with providing some additional, maybe a little bit more opinionated keyboard navigation, we ended up doing the same thing on the view grid to be able to make sure that we can enhance this as well. Because again, on the view side, we've had it, but it was more up to the developer for specifically how they wanted to implement it. Now, before I jump into the demos, I do have a poll question specifically for Vue. So I believe that should be kicking off at any moment.
Drum roll.
Drum roll.
There we go.
Yeah, all right. So we'll see here, as our Vue users are going through, we'll see how many people are working in a public-facing application, internal application, personal project, learning, or as a reference, or you're not planning to use it. So some of you might have stuck around for this entire session and you're just interested in what we're doing in Vue. So we'll see how this kind of sorts out as people are voting here. Seems like a pretty even mix so far. I'm looking over. I think we do have a larger percentage of people not planning to use it, which makes sense, right? We have a big audience of people. I think we see that across the board with all of our sessions so far, right? That the people that are working with jQuery, Angular, or React might not necessarily be looking to pick up Vue. But then you have the public-facing and internal application kind of with an even split with learning and keeping it as a reference. So that's interesting. Thank you, everybody, for voting there. That's extremely helpful. Now, all right, let's check out the Vue demos. I have just a couple of minutes to make sure that we leave you with enough time to go on with the rest of your day. So let me pop over again into the demos. As I mentioned, on the jQuery side, we do the same thing for Vue, where you see the update and you see the new tags. We do also separate between the native Vue components and the wrappers. Eventually the wrappers will phase out as we continue to add in more and more native components, but we're just doing that for the folks that need some of the advanced functionality as we're building out the suite from the ground up for the Vue components. But if we check out the multi-select here, right, very easy to walk through and either select an item. I can type something in. We see that it immediately gets highlighted. We also have some styling for a previously selected item, which is nice. If I jump into the code, breaking everything that we have in terms of the layout here, we can see that all that we need to do is we have the multi-select already imported down here, right? Coming from the Kendo View dropdowns package. And then we just declaratively lay out the multi-select and we provide the data items. The data items right now specifically are in the sports variable. For sports, we've listed out the following sports. And so very nice and easy to work with. And then of course the value is an array because we're working with multiple selected values. So that's just where we can bind if we want to be able to have some pre-selected values out of the gate. The window we can see here. I can drag around if I want to. I can maximize so it takes up all available screen real estate. I can make it regular size. I can minimize it. I can go back to a larger size. Again, easy to work with because all you really do is set up the window component and then you just have the availability to toss in whatever you want to in between the two window tags. In this particular case, we use a form component, right? Just a basic HTML form, but you can throw in whatever you want in there. And then beyond this, I should say, we have a couple of different API things you can take a look at in terms of, okay, how do I set the size? What's the title going to be? What are my available actions, etc. But beyond that, again, easy component to get up and running with because you don't necessarily even have to do that many configuration options. The slider. Nice and lovely component. Hopefully this comes through okay, but the animation is nice and smooth when I'm dragging left and right. We can see in this particular case I'm using the material theme, but we can see how that kind of also goes up and down as I go left and right using the buttons. And we also note here, right, 1, 3, 5, 7, 10. I don't have to have even distributions within the labels. I can fully control what that looks like by taking a look at, for example, we can set up slider labels like this declaratively and define specifically under which position they should be set up. And also we can even pass in what that should read. So if we want that to be emojis, if we want that to be something else and just define the position, we can do so.
Please build an emoji slider, actually.
Yeah,
that's highly encouraged.
Yeah, it's if we have the time, we could spend it today and put something together. But
your boss will love it. Your clients will love it. I see zero downsides.
Yeah, absolutely zero. All professional applications have emojis everywhere.
Exactly.
Time picker might even be one of the easiest one of them all so far, right? Because all I'm doing here is passing in, importing, I should say, the time picker and just declaratively laying out time picker. And with that, I get this whole fancy way of being able to go through. And we can see I'm scrolling right now with my mouse, which is how we can go up and down. And I can select the value, set it, boom, there we go. So, time is not necessarily the easiest thing to work with in JavaScript, but selecting a time is as easy as writing out time picker. So that's nice and easy. And it's a similar thing with the date time picker, right? So just to show you the interface, can easily switch between date and time. We can even, for example, if I just switch to the default theme, we can see what that looks like. Might be a little bit easier to see the selection here, but I can select today, for example. I can select a particular time, sure, 12:01 a.m., and there we go, off to the races. Finally, if you're interested in the grid specific feature that we added in here with the column menu, being able to add some filtering, and we have this checkbox filter section of the column menu documentation. So if I'm in the grid documentation, open up columns, I see the column menu. This is where we can see how we can go about implementing that within our component. Right now, this particular one, we just toss everything in there. So even for longer strings, we can see it just hits the scroll bar or it potentially goes under. You can customize this a little bit more as well to add some more padding if you like to, or maybe do something around the items, if they're displayed and they're a little bit too long, etc. Because you can ultimately even pass in a custom component into the filter component, which you can actually do right here. We have an article on that. All right, whirlwind effort, I think, but we have just about 3 minutes left. So finishing on time for sure. So what I just wanted to mention kind of to wrap up here, right, is that everything we've talked about today can be found if you just go to telerik.com/KendoUI. If you just want to remember one URL, that will bring you to the main Kendo UI page when you can select the various different products that you're interested in. So if you're interested in jQuery, Angular, React, or Vue, if you're interested in one or multiple, that's kind of the hub page for everything. You can find the what's new page, you can find our blogs, you can find our demos. So if you're just trying to remember one URL, this is the URL to remember. We also can find the blogs as a great source for keeping up to date with the latest and greatest versions. So I wrote blog posts for the R1 release, for example, but both Alyssa and TJ are out there writing blogs as well for the latest and greatest within React, within some of our components, and of course the latest and greatest within Angular as well. So there's a ton of different content that's coming out there. So if you're interested in keeping up to date, that's also a great resource to keep in mind. I know that I tossed in Q&A here. I don't think we necessarily have time for that, but I have been looking at the chat window and our helpers have been answering your questions super fast. So hopefully if you had a question, you got it answered, which is great. I throw the slide in here just in case we have some time, but I think that is pretty much where we're going to have to leave it. So I'm going to toss this up again, right? That tomorrow, starting at 8 a.m. Eastern, all the way to 4 p.m. Eastern, we will be covering everything that is new within R1 2021 for all the Telerik products. So .NET or JavaScript, whatever you're doing, the entire day is jam-packed. TJ and myself will be a part of the React session. And when was that again, TJ?
So it's 9:30 to 11 for React.
All right, perfect. And then Alyssa, you and I will be partnering tomorrow to cover the Angular piece, which is going to happen in the afternoon. I forget specifically what time though.
I just know it's in the afternoon.
I believe.
And I'll be there.
Yeah,
I think
it's 2 or 3 p.m. is when it starts.
Central, yeah. So then
I am
1 Eastern.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're seeing me in time zones. It's not happening.
Yeah, exactly. And here I am saying, yeah, all day tomorrow, right? I know that I'm going to be tuning in all day, and I just know that I'll also be a part of some of them. So I'll be there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So hopefully you will as well. And that's where we'll spend a little bit more time diving into some of these products. We had, roughly half an hour for each product to cover all those different features. So we can't always go into as much code or live coding as we like to. We did some, but of course, there's always more to do. So if you're interested in any of that, check it out. If you go to twitch.tv/codeit live, I believe you'll be able to see a schedule as well. So that can also, of course, help. So hopefully I'll be able to see you there tomorrow. And for those of you that are watching the recording, you'll of course have the recording of this, but we should have some VODs as well available of what we did on Twitch. But that should be it for us today. So hopefully you found this as a lovely webinar. I know I had a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool features happening in R1 2021. With all the components and everything like that. So I hope you found something that you can start implementing today. And yeah, for those of you that are joining us tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow. And for the rest of you, I'll see you during the next release webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you in the next one.
Bye.